Welcome to It Pays to Fear God. I'm your host, Ewaenruwa Nomaren, and today's video is Lie With Me. This verse or statement is drawn from Genesis chapter 39 verse 7, when Potiphar's wife had wanted to bring Joseph into her life, and she told him, "Lie with me." Potiphar's wife admired his work, his talent. And if you read Genesis chapter 39, from verses 1 to 6, you can see how it was described. He really understood his job, and Potiphar noticed that, and that was why he made sure all his belongings and everything, it was in Joseph's hands and control. And Potiphar's wife really admired him for that, wanted to lie with him, sleep with him, that kind of thing. But that wasn't Joseph's culture, and therefore he said, "Okay, I'm not really gonna go into that with you." But Potiphar's wife didn't just come to make a suggestion or to negotiate. No, she wanted it badly, and then she said, "No, you gotta do it. Lie with me." And Joseph resisted. No, I'm just not that kind of guy. So don't get me into something I'm not gonna like. She still wanted to. And then Joseph ran away, topless, and then Potiphar's wife said, "Oh, I can now use this to lie against him. If he doesn't want me, then he's not gonna run away free." And then she did, and then Joseph was thrown into prison. Now, Potiphar's wife is like Satan the devil. Very similar in character, because Satan the devil is somebody who is covetous like Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife was obviously already married, but she was also running after Joseph. So Satan the devil already has his people who he's blinded. If you read 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verses 3 and 4. He has his people who are natural, who believe in physical things which he provides in abundance. If you read 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 14. But he's not satisfied with that. He wants the children of God also, which is why he also appeals to them to, associate with him, follow his principles, believe in him, love the world, and stuff like that. And he tries to use various tricks, devices, as St. Paul called them, in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 11, to try and lure them into his fold. And he's got various people in this world who do that. For example, false prophets. They use various tactics like making you think that it's through money that you can come closer to God. So they seduce you into doing that. If you read Ezekiel chapter 13 verse 10, Mark chapter 13 verse 22, Ezekiel chapter 34 from verses 1 to 11, and 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 13. And all of this was summarized by the harlot in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. It's somebody who sits upon many waters, the political, social, religious, economic systems, etc. And that entity, Satan and his organization, rules over those things, because remember, those things make up the world, its power, its influence, etc. And that's generally what Satan has always governed from the time of Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3 from verses 1 to 6, when, remember, Satan lured them, seduced them into doing that. What he had told them about not obeying God not really saying the truth and stuff, that was like saying, "Lie with me," and Adam and Eve fell for that. They fell into that temptation. And all of this was put in some kind of parable or illustration by King Solomon in Proverbs chapter 7. There was a woman who had seen this man, void of understanding, as was described, and she lured him with flattering words like, "Come with me, the master isn't here. I mean, we've got all the freedom that we want. Just come, be with me. Let's be in love together and stuff." And because the man wasn't necessarily wise, he fell into that trap. And as verse 23 describes it, it's like a bird running into a snare, not knowing that it is for his life. Satan the devil lures people into his fold without letting them understand the fact that it is actually not for their benefit, but only for his. And there are various people in the Bible who Satan used to do that to the children of God. Apart from Potiphar's wife, obviously, there was Manasseh, who, as we see in 2 Chronicles chapter 33, Satan used him to lure the Israelites into sin. Jezebel was the same thing in 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 31 and 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 25. It was that Satan the devil used Jezebel to not only lure Ahab into worshiping Baal, but obviously because he was the king, all the other Israelites, they would kind of hop in, do the same thing. And before you know it, Israel was with him. Like I said, he was not satisfied with ruling Edom and Ammon and Moab, because remember, those were obviously not God's children. But he also wanted the Israelites, and he successfully, at various times, lured them into his fold as well. That is how Satan the devil works from the perspective of Potiphar's wife. Now, Joseph is like the righteous ones of God, who Satan tries to lure into his fold. However, as I've already described, Joseph was resistant. He did not want to participate in adultery and fornication and stuff like that, because that was just not what he grew up with. That wasn't his culture. Exodus chapter 20 verse 14. He obeyed that law by refusing Potiphar's wife. And the righteous ones of God in our time and in other times have to do the same thing. They have to go against that. They cannot fall in love with the world and stuff like that. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. 1 John chapter 2, from verses 15 to 17. We cannot associate ourselves with God and the world, share our love between them. If read Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verses 14 and 15, and James chapter 4 verse 4, which reads, Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. We have to understand the fact that we are not of the world. We are out of it, as Jesus Christ would tell his disciples. If ye were of the world would love his own. But because ye are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. John chapter 15 verse 19. We therefore have to refuse the ideas and temptations that Satan sends to righteous ones. And we have to understand, when we do so, Satan will never let us go free. Potiphar's wife did that to Joseph. When Joseph resisted, she lied against him, and remember, Joseph was innocent, but he was thrown into prison. And similarly, for sins we do not commit, Satan will make us suffer for doing such things. For lo, they lie in wait for my soul. The mighty are gathered against me, not for my transgression, nor for my sin, O Lord. Psalms chapter 59 verse 3. Because Satan rules over this world, the world is under his sway. If read 1 John chapter 5 verse 19 in the New King James Version, iniquity still has its way of taking over the world in our time, and when we resist falling into it, persecution must come. The kingdom of heaven is under persecution. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. Matthew chapter 11 verse 12. And St. Paul warned Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 12 that if you be like me, if you obey my advice and not be ashamed of the gospel, if read Romans chapter 1 verse 16, persecution is inevitable. And we must understand that persecution doesn't necessarily just come from the government, people who are so secular. It comes from family, people who are close to you, people who you wouldn't expect. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. Matthew chapter 10 verse 36. We have to understand the facts that persecution will come and make sure that we do not give our hearts so that we can be removed from that persecution. If read 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 17. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Now, let's examine other people apart from Joseph who faced certain conditions, who went through that sense of persecution after resisting to fall into certain things. For example, in Daniel chapter 6, from verses 1 straight down to the end of the chapter, or specifically verse 28, Daniel was somebody who was honored by King Darius by him being exalted above the other two generals in his class who would oversee the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. And the other two generals were envious, and if you watch my video, The Danger of Envy, that was one of the examples that I used. They were envious, and because of that, they wanted to lure Daniel into not worshiping his God. Like I said, Satan the devil uses such people to corner the righteous into his will. And we must understand, it's not that the people who are in that boat of being used by Satan the devil are deliberately doing it. No, it's more of a natural phenomenon. They themselves don't feel that you should be in that condition of being righteous. And Satan the devil is ultimately on top of that entire enterprise because he wants to lure those righteous ones into his fold. Which is why Daniel, the law was passed against him, but he was not lured. He understood the law. Remember, he knew that he would be thrown into the lion's den if he continued worshiping God, but he didn't care. He just said, well, sure, I'm going to continue worshiping God. I know what Satan the devil is doing, and I'm not falling for it. And if we read the end of the story, we see that God delivered him because of that. And King Darius was very pleased with him and made his entire kingdom worship God because of that. David was also somebody who was lured into sin by Satan the devil. This time it was from a woman. There are many things, remember, that we can be lured into. Everybody has their sin that can be set up. If you read Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1. And for David, I guess it was woman, but generally Satan the devil cooked a plot so that Bathsheba was nude while David was on his balcony. Bathsheba was bathing, and then David set his eyes on her, and then he was like, wow, this is really, really great. And then he committed adultery and murder in the process, and that was exactly what Satan the devil wanted. David did not see all the way, that far. He just thought, oh, this is a beautiful woman, and let me just have her as my wife. But Satan saw the end of it, and David had to suffer a lot from God because of that. Hezekiah was also lured into that same thing, because if we look at 2 Kings chapter 20 from verses 12 to 17, after the Babylonians had showed some kind of interest in making sure that Hezekiah's illness was cured, Hezekiah wanted to sort of pay back that kindness by showing them all the treasures that he had, the Ark of the Covenant, all those kinds of things. Satan the devil was on top of that because he knew he could lure the Hezekiah into that by allowing the Babylonians to understand what was with them, and then Hezekiah would fall into trouble because the Babylonians would want to take over the place, and then Hezekiah would do certain things that God would not want him to do. In our time, the last days, Satan the devil is alive and well, and because of that, he has set up the beast to try and lure the righteous ones of God into his fold once again, but we must understand, it is to a height that he has never achieved before. Because the beast is like secularity. Humanism, believing in yourself, achieving stuff with your own hands, crediting yourself, not being thankful. Many of these things were mentioned in 2 Timothy chapter 3 from verses 1 to 5. And that is what Satan the devil is using to take the righteous away from God. And if we look at Revelation chapter 16 from verses 13 to 16, Satan the devil has appointed false prophets, scientists, other people like that who will do miracles, make discoveries, and create inventions that will amaze people, and they will be gathered onto the battle of the great day of God Almighty, which essentially means they will become enemies of God's purpose because they will not believe in God's will any longer. People will run after the beast, and that is happening in our time. If we read Revelation chapter 13 from verses 1 to 4, However, we have been warned in Revelation chapter 14 from verses 9 to 11 to not follow such people, because it's only a temporary thing. It's not going to last forever. If we read 1 John chapter 2 verse 17. Satan the devil is only using this to weed out spirituality, that concept of believing in God. He's trying to use the beast to make that idea look foolish. People will celebrate over its defeat if we read Revelation chapter 11 verse 10. People will not like it anymore. And he's trying to use that to bring the few people who will be left of that out. However, God already promised that he will make sure that those people will not deceive everybody. They will not get to the very elect. If we read that Mark chapter 13 verses 21 and 22 and other places in the New Testament. I hope this statement, lie with me, is a little more familiar and understandable than we might have already seen it. We have to understand that the persecution that we have to suffer in order for us to go through all those things that Satan the devil wants to do to us is temporal. It is not eternal, and the rewards should never be compared to what we lose. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Romans chapter 8 verse 18. Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase, as Job had stated in Job chapter 8 verse 7. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. God has laid out eternal promises in this world, things that the world will eventually lead to. Perfect peace and happiness, animals not killing human beings anymore, corruption, poverty, war, all those kinds of things will cease. Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4. Chapter 11 from verses 6 to 9. Chapter 33 verse 24. Chapter 60 from verses 1 to 22. Chapter 65 from verses 17 to 25, and Revelation chapter 21 from verses 1 to 5. There will be a new set of principles, a heaven and an earth, that is, leaders and people who are led. That system is being rejuvenated. It's being reworked in our time so that the righteous ones of God will no more be persecuted. Satan the devil will no more have people who are loyal to his will, who he can now use to rule this world and keep it under his clutches. Rather, Jesus Christ will take over everything and hand it back to his Father in fulfillment of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 from verses 24 to 28, and eternally things will move on the way God had always ordained it to be. But that inheritance can only be gotten by people who will go through that persecution, who will stand their ground and retain their integrity. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. And viewers, I think I'm going to conclude there on the subject, lie with me. To conclude this episode, I'm going to entertain you with a tune that some of us might enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this subject as much as I did. And I always want you to remember that we should never feel sad when we're being persecuted, feel angry, feel depressed, because ultimately it is the best indicator that we are being righteous and we are not falling in love with Satan the devil and what he has to offer. But and if ye suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, And be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled, but rejoice, insomuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that, when his glory shall be revealed, ye may be glad also with exceeding joy. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 14, and chapter 4, verse 13. Have a good day.